Hi, and welcome to No More Global Summit on Tech Facilitated Gender-Based Violence. We're really chuffed. This is obviously, as you've been with us earlier on today, this is our third summit. And as always, we are really keen to talk about the ways in which people can experience harm using online platforms, tools, and sort of any forms of technology. But in an equal way, we're really keen to hear about how some incredible innovations are happening across the world and how technology is being used to enhance the opportunities for life and enjoying public spaces and creating safer spaces online. And we have a brilliant group of IT experts and innovators who are joining us today to really talk about some of the products that they have developed and seeing how those products are influencing and impacting the lived experiences of those who've endured domestic or sexual violence or who are experiencing online harms. So before we start, unlike some of the other sessions, we will be talking a little bit about some of the reasons why these technological products have been created. And some of those discussions may lead to thoughts or may trigger you into thinking that, feeling that you may need additional support. With inside the comments, we have our global directory that obviously offers a global resource around the helplines and hotlines who can respond around to sexual violence and domestic abuse. And if you're based in the US or in the UK and you're listening to this, you can use the Bright Sky app to do a similar piece and reach out to advocates that are closest to you. So before, with great pride and great appreciation, I'd love to introduce you to our panelists today. So we have Tracy, who is a CEO of Callisto, which is an anonymous reporting and documentation platform which supports survivors of sexual violence. This product has been around for a number of years, and we'll hear a little bit about how it's impacting that space, but also how people are using it and how it has sort of changed the lives of some and if not many. We have Alexander, who is a founder and the CEO of Civet, which is a Swiss-based personal safety company. And am I right in saying that you created this product in response to an experience that your friend had had? And we'll hear a little bit more about how that product is being developed and sort of some of the opportunities that it has enabled other people to do. So we have Kristen, who is from Pittsburgh's Women's Center and Shelter. You've heard quite a bit about Bright Sky through all of our summits over the past couple of years. But I think we're really interested in hearing from Kristen about where Bright Sky came from, which sort of arose from an Are You Safe app, but also really looking at some of the challenges in how we have been able to market Bright Sky, but also some of the risks associated with creating something like an app. So we're going to have a great session in exploring some of that. And of course, we have the incredible Elsa Marie, who is the founder of the Red Dot Foundation and the creator of Safe City, a platform that uses crowdsourcing reporting as a map of patterns of harassment. A really incredibly interesting product, and in some ways has a similar sort of basis to what Callisto has. So let me start off with introducing all of that. And so, Elsa, can we start with you? A really great question. Safe City uses community-generated data to map harassment and make patterns of abuse visible in public spaces. That's a great statement for what it does. Obviously, that is touching on something that many community organizations, governments, and police forces do or do not want to know about. So I think there's some interesting piece about the fact that you've delved into that particular space. And also, in a way, it's enabling people to avoid those spaces if you are traveling alone or if you're concerned about your safety. So I think you've really sort of have really developed this in a way where when I was researching sort of some of the apps that were working really well and how they were picking up and making, enjoying traveling safe for women, particularly in India, I found that this app was absolutely life-changing and sort of bringing. What have you learned about the power of visibility and the collective storytelling? And how does this translate to the lived experience and the data that you're collecting? And sort of what opportunities have you had so far in sort of enabling this set of data to change opportunities for women and girls? Three big questions all in one, I'm sure.
Thank you, Lindsay, and congratulations on this summit. I think it's really important to have conversations on this topic. So first, we have to understand why is there a need for something like Safe City or Callisto, anything, any other app. So as everybody is aware, 1 in 3 women around the world experience some form of gender-based violence, and unfortunately, 80% or more choose not to talk about it, not to make any reporting. And what does that mean? It means that the official statistics do not reflect the true nature and size of the problem. And if your experience has not been recorded, it's not in any way a true event in the statistical format, right? It's true to you, but nobody else knows about it. So, what we are doing with Safe City is really making what is invisible visible, because we've encouraged survivors to share their stories anonymously, and these are then geotagged on a map so that you can visualize it as location based patterns and trends. Now, this is important because once you see it, you can't unsee it. So, first of all, we are creating a safe space for survivors to share their story, what happened, where it happened, the date and time, if there's any intersectionality to their experience. So, besides gender, was it sexuality, disability, ethnicity, etc., that was the cause of this particular incident? And then, making that data available to them so that they can make better choices, make better decisions regarding their safety. And one might say, why put the burden again on the survivor? But in truth, if systems fail us, at least we would have some situational awareness that might help us in staying safe. On the bright side, with this data, we have found that a lot of survivors feel a sense of agency because now they have the data to um, maybe mobilize, organize their communities, maybe make a case for themselves without having to reveal their own identities. This is an anonymized data set, right? And we are showing that due to certain circumstances, this particular type of incident is happening all the time at a particular location. And that forces the society, the communities that we live in, to actually take a stance, to do something about it. And we have seen this all over the world, not just in India, where it forces police to act, it forces mayor, city officials to take action. Transport, one of the I'll tell you in our data set, the peak that people are reporting with at the time that they are experiencing the violence, we have two peaks. One is 12 noon to 2 p.m. and the other is 5 to 7 p.m. And when we tell people that, they're actually shocked because in their minds, violence happens in the dark, it happens in the night. And, here we are saying it's happening in broad daylight. And for example, in India, in many places, the instant reaction is let's fix the street lighting. And while street lighting is important for the sense of safety in a public space, what are you going to do about in the middle of the day when it's happening? But this is not something that urban planners are accounting for. It's not what transport planners are taking into account as well. So I think lived realities of survivors is very important in decision making processes, but also in giving agency to survivors to demand accountability and better support, and for communities to support them, not just when an incident has occurred or after an incident, but to really prevent it from happening. So I'm excited because over the years, we have learned so much about how to use this data in advocacy. And every location, the local communities have chosen to use it in many different ways. And that is also very inspiring. So from, murals on walls at key locations outside public toilets, near tea stalls, outside girls' colleges. This really puts community on notice, and it's a very low cost solution in my view because it's similar to saying beware there's a dog in this house or there's a CCTV camera around you're being watched. So it puts the onus back on the perpetrator. We've had religious leaders talk to men and boys because now they are confronted with the data and, of course, they are shocked and there's no excuse anymore. So they have to engage themselves. And we've had parents take greater interest in their girls' safety, whereas earlier, under the guise of safety, parents would probably protect their girls and say, no need to go out late in the night, don't venture too far, etc. Now the girls are saying, why should we feel unsafe? What is it that you can do to make us feel safe? So they've asked for their own school buses. And We found that in communities where parents are engaged, teachers are engaged, city officials, etc., are engaged, the larger community is engaged. Survivors, their confidence to report increases by 30% on the Safe City app. There's still trust to be built with the police, and 70% to take negotiated risks. That means staying out later, venturing further, maybe negotiating for higher education, etc. So these are some of the reasons why storytelling is important, why apps like ours are important to make what's invisible visible, and then you can't really unsee it. And there's no excuse then to not act.
I mean, that's just phenomenal. I think there's so much that you're saying in that. You're saying that, we're disrupting what we originally think about risk. And we're saying that, being out late at night is not the ultimate risk space. It's times during the day. And I suppose switching that into evidence-based understanding must be really empowering for family members, for parents, and for young women and girls. But I think it's incredible that it's changing the views of those that are planning cities and thinking differently and putting in those really useful practical steps. I think, yeah, it's absolutely been, and in a little bit, it sort of echoes the work that Callista is doing, but from a different sort of perspective. Tracy, would you like to add anything?
No, I just think that what they're doing is really great, and all of that data is so needed because without data, we don't really know the scope of the problem because like she said, it's just been hidden for so long.
So we know data is really important. So jumping across to you, Alexander, and you started this opportunity, you started your tool, your bracelet in from a space of seeing what someone that you cared for had experienced. And obviously you hear a lot about technology and safety and can technology replace the human being in that response sort of way around safety, and how far can we rely on safeties often sorry, on technology in relation to technology. So I suppose from your perspective, what do these tools genuinely do well? What have you learned from using technology in a meaningful way to support people? And what are your sort of thoughts about how you can challenge that question around can a technology replace human being in response to safety?
Definitely, Lindsay. Thank you for the question. What is important, I think, first of all, to really picture is that when people hear technology and safety, they see an app, they see a SOS button, that it screams, I need help. When in real life, what we really try to do with Sere is really how do we integrate personal safety into the everyday life of people with product and application that they can use on a daily basis and that really integrates in their lifestyle. So that's why we really work on the jewelry parts. For example, with Sere, the bracelet I'm wearing today, by just pressing 2 times, your location and an emergency phone call is being shared to your loved one, to emergency services, and to a community of users. So the technology is very good at how fast can we alert, but there is one thing that the technology cannot do is support the person at the moment they need help. And that's why you need the human. That's why you need the emergency services. That's why you need all these NGO to support people. So technology is really facilitating how fast can you react in case of an emergency. It can also help in the support phase, but at the end of the day, you need a human to really help the victim. And what Elsa was saying is very important, data. The human is really predictive, and all of this data about safety on a larger scale can also be predicted. So I think all of the app are very important in terms of collecting the data. And the question is really, how are we going to use this data very precisely to be able to predict future events? How to be smart enough to share to our users the capabilities of knowing safe place, not safe place, on a very precise point of view. So that's the main response I would have for this.
I think that's a really interesting point because often those working in the response part of the, victim survivor responses are often quite fearful or apprehensive around technology in the space that it could be replacing some of the actions and the support that us as human beings would offer in those moments. And I think you're absolutely right. The technology that we have is an addition, and it's something that can alert and create opportunities for us to reach out sooner for support and in ways that are more accessible in the moment of experiencing harm or being in that moment of fear or trauma. And I think you're right, you land on that space around what can we do now with this data that our products create, and how can we use that to sort of inform the work that we do going forward. Really, really interesting.
Thank
Tracy,
you.
slightly different question. Your Callisto has been around for a significant amount of time, and you've taken a really interesting space in the sense that it is sort of very, very much, marketed towards those people who are in colleges or in universities. Firstly, can you tell us a little bit about Callisto and what it does and how that it tracks and how it connects victims and survivors together? And then I would love to ask you a couple of questions about what happens afterwards with that data.
Yeah, thank you for that. So we have an end-to-end platform that helps survivors learn if their perpetrator has harmed somebody else without them having to publicly disclose or report to police or authorities in any manner. And so anybody in the US right now that is a college student or college faculty, so they just have to have that .edu email address, has free access to our platform. And what they do is they create an account and then they enter into matching and they put in the state where the assault occurred because our laws vary state by state here in the US. And then they put in a unique identifier of the person who harmed them. So the person who harms them, social media accounts, email address, phone number, whatever they have. And that's what we use to match on. And that's because a name isn't unique enough. I have a cousin named John Smith. There's probably several of you on the call that has a cousin named John Smith. And so what happens is that if two people put in the same person's Instagram handle, let's say, there's a match. And just like what Alexander said, technology can't do everything. Humans have to do some of it. So they're not notified right away. It's not like a dating site. They're not notified right away for security reasons. What happens is that we get notified, but due to our encryption, because we're end-to-end encrypted, which means that our data, all the data that survivors put in is encrypted prior to hitting our servers, that the survivor and the perpetrator information is still encrypted to Callisto staff, including myself. What we do is we assign that case to a confidential advocate through Ampersand's advocacy resources, who are trained professionals to work with survivors, and they can see the entire entry. They reach out to the survivors separately and say, there's been a match in Callisto's system. Did you want to meet? And we're constantly putting the power back to survivors. And so they get the choice of whether they meet or not. If they want to, it's free for them. And that's when they first tell what happened to them and will get the options that are available to them, whether that's criminal justice, civil justice, Title IX, which is a place that students can report on college campuses here in the US, or HR, or even mental health resources, and they'll be given as many warm handoffs to those resources that they want. We don't pressure them to report, so we are not a reporting platform in the sense that we don't report to police, Title IX, or HR. We don't investigate what happened. And we are not a public database that people can sort through. So after they go through their options, the next thing that the advocate will do is work to connect the survivors if they want to be connected, and only if they want to be connected, so they can pursue that healing and justice, whatever that means for them. Because we know that 90% of sexual assaults on college campuses in the US, and I assume that it's similar everywhere, are committed by serial perpetrators who on average offend 6 times. And we know that survivors are reporting less than 10% of the time. And so we also know that 1 in 40 of our entries matches, and that people are more likely to report and seek justice if they know that they are not alone.
Thank you so much for Tracy. I mean, there's so much that you've said and all of that. I think the thing that jumps out a lot to me is the fact that we've been speaking about numbers. One perpetrator will have impact on 6 different victims, but what that really means in reality is that how many perpetrators could be exerting harm on other people without being able to connect that, and that person being unchallenged, and how long that could be. So I suppose my first question would be, do you use your data, of bearing in mind that it's all anonymous, to support sort of the law enforcement in understanding how repetition happens, how similar with same perpetrators, or looking at those patterns?
We haven't yet, and there's a couple reasons for that. One, we want to make sure that we fully have the trust in survivors. And so the minute we start working with law enforcement, that trust erodes. We will work with law enforcement as far as giving warm handoffs to survivors that want it. And once we have a big enough data set, we will look at changing laws and policies and really influencing the way that law enforcement does work. Because I think that with looking at serial perpetration, we don't fully know the numbers. Right? Just because this is such an underreported crime, when there's studies about serial perpetrators, it's either self-reported data from the perpetrator and trying to ask that question because no person says, yes, I'm a sexual offender, right? Or it's looking at people who've been convicted. And that's the worst of the worst. Or in the US, with how racist our systems are, it skews towards Black and brown men. And so we think that once we get a really big data set over the years, we will be able to really see the impact of serial perpetration and what to do about it and how to hold these perpetrators accountable. And then that will help law enforcement. So that really is our long-term goal, but that is not something that we are doing right now. And with that, our data is so encrypted that a lot of times we can't get data out of it. And I'm sure that we'll probably talk about this in a little bit, but that's the issue of data. Data is gold these days, but data is what can also really make survivors unsafe and really harm them. And so we have protected our data in so many ways that is oftentimes hard to report to funders to say this is the impact. It's hard to report to other people to say this is what we do because we have chosen to put the survivors first and center that versus us first. And what the world wants is all of this data as well. And so we're trying to balance that, and we're continually evolving that and making sure that it's really that survivors have informed consent of everything they put into our platform.
Thank you so much. And I think you're absolutely right. It's that seesaw balance between ensuring that those that use the app, who the app, or use the technology, that they sit at the center of what you're doing, and how do we use this information to effect change, and how that can be a seesaw of who you help and what you do in that right moment. So I love your approach in seeing the long journey towards where you're going to be with it. It's really, really interesting. And in a way that sort of leads us really into Kirsten, I've heard to talk about Bright Sky. I know because I met you many, 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 many years ago. I think it's now nearly over 10 years ago, when you had already had a technological response to domestic abuse because you had launched the Are You Safe app. And from that, it's moved on to Bright Sky and it's continued to develop. So I guess my first question to you really is, from those really, really early days, what did you learn from survivors in their way of responding to and engaging with a digital tool?
Yeah, earlier when we were talking about the session and unexpected noises, I was kind of in my head thinking, well, I can't really control it. So I work in the same building as our shelter. So my office is directly below the shelter space. And so often I'll hear the kiddos running back and forth, or we might have some toys drop. But I think that kind of speaks to what the question is and, the lived experiences of the survivors we serve. So Women's Center and Shelter of Greater Pittsburgh has been serving survivors, for over 50 years. And in that, and our programs sort of span the whole survivor journey from sort of that beginning space where it's, we have a hotline where those experiencing domestic violence are calling in a very critical place, and then perhaps seeking shelter, perhaps seeking support groups, all the way to when, they're safely out of their journeys and they're sort of, looking to more financial empowerment. So we know that the needs vary digitally along that journey. So, at the beginning, it's really about, and we talk all of us about safety. And so in a digital space, it towards the beginning of the journey, it really is about safety and discretion. Also about, language that is validating, not victim blaming. And it's said in a way that really empowers the survivor to make their own choices, which I think is really important. I know that's something we really talk about all the time, and that every journey is unique for each survivor. we talk about domestic violence and sexual assault, but they're just so different for every person. And so the digital resources really have to be reflective of that. So, it's safety, it's discretion. Um, Apps, we've made ours available in various languages. So I think too, survivors have to see themselves in the language. I know shortly after we um, put Bright Sky out there in launched it in the US in March 2023, and I just want to read this quote because I thought it was really powerful. Um, Someone wrote to us and said, I recently found myself in a situation that I didn't expect as a grown man. Through some convincing my friends and information from various resources, I was able to see the patterns and made plans to leave. So when I found your app listed as a resource, I was relieved to have something I could reference when I was being manipulated, record my feelings so I could remember them clearly when I was being gaslit, and do it discreetly was a godsend. I'm out and safe now and working to rebuild and find solid ground. So that was just really powerful. And that let us know, I think, that we really had found something here. When you're able to give someone a tool that they're able to see themselves in, understand they're being abused, because I think it's just incredible sometimes, when talking to our residents, how often they don't even understand how much they've been through. What they had been through was abuse and it wasn't okay. So I think when creating the app, we sort of brought those lived experiences of survivors into Bright Sky. And also, I know we talk about this a lot, Lindsay, though the app is for victims and survivors, it's really also for those who are safe to download it and help those who are experiencing violence. So we always make that caveat because, again, safety is at the heart of everything we do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I thank you so much for sharing
Yeah,
that. I think
sure.
what's really interesting is that although all the apps are very much focused on safety, they all talk to a different point along that violence against women and girls sort of spectrum of safety. And actually, when we think about how and where we need to place these apps for people to find them and use them, it needs to be in very, very different spaces. And people interact really differently. I guess there's something that always comes up when you sort of, where you're designing products to enhance somebody's feelings of safety, but obviously technology shouldn't be needed in that space because safety should sort of exist. So I guess my question is to all of you and whoever would like to answer first really is, how do you design tools that are supportive, they are accessible, bearing in mind the cost of accessing different tools can be varied depending on whereabouts you live in the world or your ability to have, a data plan. And how do you communicate sort of what the limits of technology can do? I mean, I think if there's anything that I've ever heard on repeat is whenever we talk about, using technology to provide a tool for safety, the most fearful person in the room will always say, but what happens if it gives somebody a false sense of security and then they become harmed? How are you all mitigating against that statement? Would anybody, Alsami, would you like to start? I look straight at you when I say this.
Yes, this is a great question. So, our app is in its third iteration, and right from the beginning, it has been designed by survivors for survivors. I'm also a survivor, and I also did not report my incidents publicly or to my friends. So, I wanted something that was simple, easy, and yet not triggering or traumatic. So, in the third iteration of our app, it has an empathy layer in the design and the UI UX design. So there is one question per screen, only the questions that are absolutely necessary. So it takes literally less than 2 minutes to fill up a report. It's completely anonymous. We do not even track IP addresses. There's no naming, shaming, or blaming because we focus on the location. I understand Callisto is different and it's designed differently, but we focus on the location. And focusing on the location actually takes away a lot of the stigma around the experience. Because then we are saying, what is it about this location that makes it the comfort zone of a perpetrator? And how can we change that? How can the community also support in changing that? And so that is the reporting. We've made it accessible in 15 plus languages. And to us, technology should not be the barrier to reporting. So we also have our communities handwrite pen and paper, and then somebody in the community has the responsibility of uploading it on the site, or they choose somebody in their community, like in one community in rural Maharashtra, which is the state that Mumbai is in. They picked what is called an Ur Sarpanch. Not an official position, but this woman is like a policewoman, but like a community policewoman. And they chose her to do it. So it really is giving the agency back to the survivors to say, what works for you? How would you like your story to be shared? And of course, nobody's forcing them, and many of them have said that actually filling up the form gives them a vocabulary for their experience, because many of them didn't even know. They, of course, knew intuitively that something was not right, but maybe they didn't know the laws. They didn't have the exact terminology. So many of them have said that this gives them a vocabulary for their experience. And of course, knowing that others have been through it also helps them not feel very alone. And because it's anonymous, once you fill up the first form, which we call the primary form, we have mapped out the Indian penal codes or the various countries where we have partners. We've mapped out the penal codes, the helplines, the counseling helplines, the police stations, etc., so that they can still engage with the formal system. In fact, we're encouraging them to engage with the formal system. And so the slight nudges, but at the end of the day, it's up to them. So at least they will have the required information that they need to take it forward should they wish to take it forward. And then we also encourage them to take a secondary form, which gives us more information on the correlation and causation of that particular incident. So how many perpetrators were they known to you? How many bystanders? What did they do? And all this information really also helps us and our partners think about, okay, what do we need to do to correct the situation? So do we invest in more bystander training, intervention training? Do we invest in more rights-based training or social norms, to challenge that? Because in India, for example, the socio-cultural norms are perpetrated by Bollywood, pop culture, and so on and so forth. So where do we focus our energy? Is it an urban planning issue? Is it an education? Of course, education, I think we need to have all kinds of education for all kinds of people at an early age. So I think our app is a survivor-centric app. And we've always taken account their experiences into account. For example, recently there's been a rise in femicide in Kenya and in India. So we are thinking of adding that as a separate category. And that comes from the survivors. We had a category that it was not a category, but many of the stories talked about, chain snatching. Chain snatching, most Indian women wear gold chains. And so they were the recipients of that attack. Now, that's not sexual violence per se, but maybe because of your gender, you're seen as vulnerable enough to be robbed. So we added that as a category because it kept coming up in the report. So I think it's really very closely built with the survivors. And even now that we are introducing AI, the way that we are introducing AI is to help survivors unpack this information, this data set. Because like Alexander said, public safety should be integral to your everyday life. But how do you help people think about it without being overwhelmed? And could AI make it simple enough for you to say, okay, this is the problem in this area? We don't want you to avoid it, but we do want you to be better prepared should you experience it, what would be your response and what can you do in that situation? So that's where we are putting in our energies on AI, and we'll test it out with survivors also to see what do they think and what are their ideas as well. So all the solutions actually in the communities are also designed by the survivors, like I mentioned, the wall murals, etc.
So that's really interesting. So what we're, in a sense, you're saying is that the app in itself is not there to replace a human being or to encourage somebody to do what other people, to do different behavior. It's that if you are going into that environment, that you know that your behavior needs to be consistent, and you will have a little bit more information about what has happened previously. And then if you do find yourself having experienced any of that, being able to then share it, and is quite cathartic in that sort of response piece. And I think that's really interesting, because being a victim of any form of crime, albeit somebody, taking your mobile phone because it's been sitting on the table while you're having lunch, all the way to being, having a home invasion or being experiencing sexual violence, there is so much shame that is associated with it. And there is so much in when you make that very first disclosure to whomever you make it to. It could be your best friend, it could be a police officer, it could be your next door neighbor. That person's response can be so compounding of that experience. And all of us, every single one of us, can make a very simple mistake in responding with a sentence that can evoke shame. So having an app or a tool where you can methodically move through it, where you're sort of just disclosing everything, can be quite cathartic and really helpful in a way from that trauma experience and sort of unpacking it, which is really, really interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Marie. Alexander, I suppose your tool in its sense does exactly that. It creates an alert, it makes people aware of what is happening. It can't stop the experience, but it does enable someone to feel a little bit more confident in going out and doing things that they perhaps wouldn't do previously. Have you had any feedback from any of your users around how it's expanded their life, knowing that they have a tool?
Definitely. And so at Cere, so I think what Elsa is fully right. Any solution today are not final. They need to be evolving. They need to be user-centric, and they need to be as much as possible, especially when it comes to after the event, personalized, because everyone react differently. Christine's see it every day. Everything is different. There is no one role. There is no magic solution on this market, unfortunately. And so it's about how do we put all of the solution out there, all the organization out there to really support people when they need it. At Ceres, we're a company born in Switzerland 3 years now. We work very hard on the product itself, but the product also has been evolving according to the different feedback for the users. So now we have a 30-second audio recording that is being made that can also be used for the report, because again, the point is not for the victim to feel like the victim, and it's to empower the users and to give them enough proof, enough data to be able to go report it with their live location for the next 48 hours, where they're going to really be able to have access to some hopefully public camera.
Thanks, Alexander, for answering that question. So, in an interesting sort of move on space, we've spoken a little bit about how all the tools and the resources are useful, and the ways in which they support victims and survivors, and how they can be used by friends and family members and those people around victim survivors. I want to ask you a question about how have you found promoting these tools and resources? Because I think one of the challenging pieces will always be is that these tools and resources are used at a time in somebody's life where you never want to predict or say that you would have that experience. So how are you going out and promoting and talking about these tools? Tracy, can I start with you, please?
Absolutely. That is our biggest challenge. And so I really love this question. I think that so many times I've been doing this work for 25 years as a licensed clinical social worker. So I've been in gender-based violence for a long time. And from local domestic violence shelters to group homes to now running Callisto. And we're not good at promoting what we do in general in the field. And I think that for Callisto, we have to think about how do we get college students aged 18 to 22 to think about this,
Mm.
right? To think about their risks. And most of them, when they have been assaulted, don't understand that they've been assaulted because they think about rape or sexual assault as somebody jumping out from behind a bush or that it happens at nighttime, that we've discussed already. And what's happening really is that it's their friend. It's somebody they know. It's somebody they trusted. It's their boyfriend. It's their girlfriend. It's their best friend. It's somebody like that that is quote unquote taking advantage of them after a party or, doing something. And that take advantage language is really just grooming for sexual assault. And so people don't, it takes a long time for people to say that they have been raped and use that word. And so figuring out what words people are using and generationally, like Gen X is way different than Gen Z. And recognizing the fact that most people don't want to follow an Instagram account about sexual assault. If they're survivors, they don't want to be continually triggered. And so that has been a challenge. We have Callisto ambassadors who are students on campuses that want to spread the word, so they put up posters. A lot of times the universities won't allow that because they're worried about their own liability, as they should be. I think that there's so many things that go into any of our work, but really with Callisto, that if you don't understand how terrible the systems are for survivors, you don't understand why we have to exist. So with Callisto as well, if you have been harmed in your relationship, you probably know that a domestic violence shelter exists. And so you Google that and you're looking for one in your area. People don't know that Callisto exists. People don't know it's a technology that is out there because we're really the only ones around the world that are doing this in this way. And so you don't even know to look for it. And the other key piece is that funders don't want to fund marketing. And that is a really big piece for us too. No More has done these incredible campaigns that have brought so much awareness to so much of it. But those are really hard and expensive to do, that so many of us don't have that ability to work with a marketing agency to really get that done. And so I think that this is the biggest challenge with any technology or any kind of solution for sexual assault, is telling people it exists.
You're absolutely right. And it's how we stumble upon this information when we need it most. And if you aren't able to put up those posters in the university, on the back of those bathroom doors, in locker rooms, how would you know? Because like you say, in that moment, how do you actively seek out something that you don't know exists? And I think that's really, really important. I know, Kristen, you've done lots and lots of work since Bright Sky US has been launched
Yes.
on this piece. What are
Yeah.
your thoughts?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges we face, and Lindsay, you know this as well, we want to promote the app, but we also don't want abusers to understand that the app exists. So we're always kind of facing that push and pull. There are certain features of the app that we don't promote and we don't talk about publicly. We always meet as a group to discuss the risks before we go into a campaign. But I think we do a lot of different things, starting very grassroots, up to some bigger things we've done. So, we have a Bright Sky Friday on our social media campaigns. We put it in our newsletter every month. We have done social media campaigns that have been fairly successful. One thing we've found highly successful as well is doing some campaigns on Spotify. Those have really translated into direct downloads. We recently, this past year, tried to work with some influencers. Those translated to some direct downloads. I know No More has been working with the National Football League. We've been able to get some spots with them. Something very cool locally that has happened. The Pittsburgh Pirates, which is our baseball team here in Pittsburgh, they agreed to put little decals of the Bright Sky app with a QR code in the women's restrooms all throughout the ballpark. So things like that, and working, with some local teams or organizations, seem to work out well. It definitely isn't easy, though. I mean, it's always that balance of safety versus how big do you go with it. And so I think as a team, we're always talking about the risks when we are discussing campaign. And like you, Tracy, we sort of have ambassadors, and we're talking to the colleges and the universities, and with every tabling event, we have our bright sky information. With every presentation to corporation, we make sure we have our bright sky information. So we really try to incorporate it in everything we do, with balancing the safety aspects.
Thank you for that, Kristen. I mean, I
Sure.
think that's really interesting. It's the fact that you've got the perpetrator to be to consider, and the fact we know that if you're in an abusive relationship and you perpetrator is stalking or harassing you and has access to your digital tools, and they see a app or something that refers to domestic abuse, it's obviously increasing that risk significantly.
Right.
Interestingly, I wonder if you're taking a similar approach, Elsa Marie, with regards to the tool that you have, bearing in mind you have a different type of client group in a different moment. How do you promote it?
So I agree with everyone. This is a topic that is so deeply personal and traumatic that people don't really want to engage. I always say that had I had an app on sanitation, it would have been the most well-known app. But this is a very deeply personal issue, right? And it's very, very hard. I think even working on child sexual abuse is easier than sexual and gender-based violence because everybody wants to protect children. So I see the difference. If I post on social media on child sexual abuse, it gets a lot of engagement. But if it is just gender-based violence or sexual violence and it's for adults, men and women don't want to engage because men might think that their friends would think that they are perpetrators for some reason, and the women don't want to be seen as victims. So, what have we done? What has been successful for us is really partnerships. A lot of partnerships with community based organizations who, their communities are always facing this issue, but they may not have the tech component or the tech tools to support their survivors. Many of them work with survivors on a one-to-one case basis, providing legal aid, counseling aid, etc. But we look at the problem slightly differently. We zero up, from the ground to look at it as patterns and trends in that location. So our partners have been really helpful in promoting it within their communities. And the second one is, I think Tracy mentioned they have ambassadors on college campuses. We also have campus ambassadors and youth safety champions and women safety champions. For us, it came about differently because young people, our data set showed that when they were faced with, say, traumatic incidents like violence, they would not tell a trusted adult, their parent or teacher, they would tell a friend, and their friend often didn't know what to do or how to help them. And so this whole program started with how do we help the friend be a peer educator, first responder in these situations? And that has really been helpful. Most of our reports actually come from one of these two sources. And this has taken on a life of its own. Like last year, we had 5,000 safety champions. So even if, each of them has spoken to 100 or maybe even 10 people, it's 50,000. But then our teams also are out and about, educating people on their rights and, teaching them bystander intervention strategies. Our partner over there is Right to Be, which used to be Hollaback. So we have partnered with a large variety of people because I don't think this is a topic that we can solve on our own as a single organization. All of us and all these apps that you have showcased through this panel are very complementary in nature, yet they are addressing a different aspect of the problem. And I think together we are stronger.
I agree. Explicitly in the together we are stronger. There are things that we can learn from each other in just this conversation, which will enhance us going forward. Alexander, before I move on to the next question, you have a very different opportunity with regards to promoting your tool. How have you found it easy to promote it, or have you had any stumbling blocks in doing so?
Yeah, so for us, it's totally different because what we are selling is a piece of jewelry that has these extra features of safety. So now our work at Serre is really to build a luxury brand with fashionable item, not only expensive, just to reassure everyone in the audience. The idea is also to have the accessibility part. But for us, the safety part is not secondary, but in the promotion, first, we see the product, which is a piece of jewelry, and then we are able to go through the technical solution, the software, with all the data. So as Tracy and Christine mentioned, and also Elsa, we are working with ambassador, especially in the US, college campus ambassadors. This is what we are developing right now in major campus. And yeah, we're also working very hard on making it interesting brand for people to wear. That's the whole idea. Because once they wear our solution, then the app comes along with it.
It's really interesting. I do like the way of sort of every single person is talking about the ambassador. And what it screams at me is that technology still is a tool in our toolbox, but the human being is still the most important person of all. And how powerful those relationships really are, and that technology is in no way acting as a replacement. It's coming on as a sort of an enhancement of that. I have two more questions really, and I can't sort of end this panel without asking about the massive elephant in the room, which has existed throughout the whole of this summit, is AI, and the beauty of AI and the power of AI and the opportunities that AI brings, but also the inherent biases that AI, brings, and some of the challenges that it can bring forward. So I think my question to all of you is, how do you see AI enhancing the work of your product in the next year or so? And if you are considering using AI, what are some of the restrictions that you are willingly placing around AI? And it could be that you choose not to use it at all, that the product is great in its sense, or you may say there are opportunities. Tracy, should I start with you?
Sure. Right now within Callisto Vault, within our technology platform, we're not using AI. We don't need it, to be honest. Like with how we do the matching, we use these really advanced cryptographic techniques that we don't need the AI. However, we are, as a tech for good nonprofit, AI is here and it's not going anywhere. And so we need to make sure that we're aware of what's happening and how AI is impacting survivors, and whether that is from AI produced imaging, that they can still use that if they know who created that, and they can still use our app, and like knowing that that is another form of abuse that people experience, as well as operational. We are a very small team doing a lot of work. And so we're using AI in the background to really enhance what we can do as a team and how to operationalize that. And working with different partners to see how we can eventually use AI for support systems and stuff. But I am still really skeptical on AI chatbots for any kind of trauma-informed work, because I think that, as we've talked about on this panel, you need that human aspect. But I don't think that that means that we can never use them, or there's not a place for them in some other capacity. But there's confidentiality. A lot of survivors are using like ChatGPT or Claude for like therapists. Those aren't confidential. And so those can be subpoenaed in court. And I don't think that a lot of users realize that. So we're still trying to figure out, how do we educate people? Where is it our lane to educate people? And how do we continue to think about AI in the future, even if not right now?
Interesting. I hear you on that one. I think what I found incredibly interesting, and I suppose it's something that has come up quite a lot through some of the sessions today about intimate image sharing, is that often that if you've experienced that, you wouldn't necessarily think that you would go to a traditional sexual violence or sexual assault support service. And to hear you mention it so clearly, that actually Callisto is part of that journey and how useful and powerful that could be, I'd really, encourage people to consider that as one of the options of support as well. I think it's sort of missed in that regard. From Kirsten, from your perspective with AI.
I mean, honestly, my answer would be the exact same as Tracy's. We're not using it right now in Bright Sky. It's not to say we wouldn't look into it. Just the same exact thoughts as far as survivors and just the skepticism around how it could do harm to survivors, using certain tools for safety planning. It's something Alexander said earlier about, the predictability. I do think there is something there with AI and sort of these predictive analytics as it relates to that. Something we're doing as an agency is just exploring AI. We are actually partnering with a local university and their very intelligent students. And we're having, monthly sessions available to our staff and those we serve, on domestic violence and technological abuse and AI. So I think we're sort of more in the education phase because, as Tracy said, it's here. I think it's all of our responsibilities to understand it, the positives and sort of what could be the drawbacks to those we serve. So I do think it's something we obviously all have to pay attention to. It likely could possibly enhance some of what we do, but I do think there is that trepidation there, particularly in the realms that we all work within. So we're definitely learning, keeping our eyes open, and trying to understand implications. I think that's sort of the place that we're in as well.
I found it really interesting that you mentioned, Kristen, about predictability, and Alexandra mentioned as well. I know that part of the work that we've been doing in the domestic abuse sector, both in the US and the UK, for many, many years, is understanding the risks associated and escalation of risks, and having really robust homicide risk assessments, and then the stalking safe dash risk assessment that rests here in the UK. And both of those assessments really do lead an advocate or those working with victims and survivors into that predictability space of knowing where harm can increase and decrease. So I find it really interesting how much we are relying and turning to AI to do something that many people have been working on and being able to gather, and how that can sort of impact and influence that. Elsa Marie, how are you seeing AI used, or would you consider using AI in your tools?
Yes. So, for the last 2 years, we've been encouraging our teams to explore AI and become proficient at it. And in the last few months, so we actually had an AI policy, AI usage policy, and it wasn't for our data. We said we are not going to put our data into AI at the moment till we understand how it's being used and how to use it, because we don't want to make a mess of it, right? So the first step was getting comfortable with AI, getting our teams, using ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, whatever they want to use. But, doing the simple stuff of, okay, how do you write content better? How do you write graphs? How do you write your reports? Let's just get them started on that. Then we started on internal efficiencies. So we have an HR bot, for example, because now we are a team of 35 people and we only had one person in HR, right? And we are across time zones. We are a remote organization. So we started with that. But now we have a tech bot for our data cleanup, our data visualization, our data analytics. Again, all of it is back end and it's not public facing, and we are testing and we are checking and we've put the guardrails, and we are not opening it up yet to our other nonprofit partners till we are convinced that what we have created, these agents, are good enough and safe enough and trustworthy and ethical. But we will be training our partners as well, because AI is here, and it can help you be more efficient. We are all running on very tight budgets. We are all very small organizations. So, but how can we also compete with, say, the corporates who are using AI? But of course, if you don't engage, somebody else will build it for you and you won't have control over it. So we decided, let's get our hands dirty. Let's, start working on it. And the more we understand how it functions, the better we can influence it from a survivor's perspective. So we are excited and we are embracing it. but yet at the same time, we are being mindful and taking baby steps.
That's really interesting. Thank you for that. I'm conscious of time, so Alexandra, I'm going to start this question for you to answer if possible. Lots and lots of people would have watched today's session and they would have admired the work that you have done and the boundaries that you have, walked through to achieve it. What would your number one suggestion be for somebody who's sitting in a service somewhere, or perhaps as a victim survivor who's thinking about creating a piece of technology? What would your piece of advice be for them? Alexandra, would you like to start?
Yeah, so I don't have too much advice to give, but I think if you are developing a solution to support people, you should really listen to the people and develop your own solution around the people. And for others, help easier. It's getting easier and easier to get help, but it's also a very personal wish to do so. And behind the door, there is many people happy to welcome all of these people, I'm sure of. We're working hard, all of us, very hard every day to make sure to help as much as possible as people. So we are here. Yeah.
Thank you. Kristen?
I would say if you're thinking of delving into a space where you want to create an app, first do a lot of research, see what's out there, make sure you're not creating something that is duplicative. Perhaps there are ways to partner with others in the space. I would say build solid partnerships. That's incredibly important whenever you're going into something like this. As Alexander mentioned, ensure that whatever you're doing, you are representing those that you serve and those who are using the app in the most authentic way, ensuring that their voices are heard throughout the app so that people feel connected to it and that it ultimately serves the purpose that the apps are survivor-centered, trauma-informed, and that at the end of the day, those who need the help are being connected to it in a way that is thoughtful. That would be my advice.
Tracy?
I echo everything that's already been said. And, we get asked a lot. There's people that contact me every week that say, we want to build a Callisto for our thing. And I say, partner with us first. We are trying to expand. We are looking for that. And that's all about funding. But one of the things I say to them is that the technology is one piece of it. It's everything else that is so much bigger. It's the marketing, right? It's how do you get people to know about it? How are bad actors going to use it? How are people going to try to attack it? What happens after a match in our case, and what are the legal parts of that, and how are the systems that don't want us to exist going to push back at us? And you have to think about all of that. So you need partners, just like Kristen said, that have been doing this work for a long time. A lot of technology doesn't exist because we haven't thought about it. It doesn't exist because we either don't have the resources to make it happen, or there are so many barriers that have to be addressed first before we can make that. Just like Kristen said, they want to promote the app, but the more people that know about these apps, the more abusers that know about these apps, the more the manosphere is going to try to take these apps down. And so really partner and work with other nonprofits or NGOs or other companies that are already doing the work and enhance that work rather than really starting and doing your own thing is the best advice that I would give.
Brilliant advice. Elsa Marie?
Well, I would say the same as whatever has been said earlier. You don't need to recreate the wheel. We already have enough solutions out there. It's just that you need to get the word out. And the way we build Safe City, it's very easily, it can be customized by location. And all you need to do is use a language. So add a language. So we always tell a new partner, why don't you try it as is in your country, in your community? In fact, don't even look at your country. Just start in your own neighborhood and see what's working, what's not working. And then you will know what is it that you want to do that is different from what we are doing, right? But why do you want to waste time and effort and resources which you don't have? into building a new app, just partner with us. And in fact, our app is free. It's only if you need customizations that there's a little cost, but it's still cheaper than building a new app. So I would suggest that, people partner with all these other apps that you've showcased on this panel, try it out. Partnerships are the best way to spread the word. In fact, when we started, we used Ushahidi, which is an open source platform, and we used it for many, many years till it didn't work for us. And then we built our own. But the way we built it is for our partners as well. So I would say, you don't have to recreate the wheel.
I think you're spot on, and I think it's a lovely place to sort of end this discussion. Of course, I could chat for ages, but I can sort of see that we've had a lovely amount of time, and I think you're absolutely right. Whenever you're thinking about creating technology, the first place to start is who are we creating it for? How will those people use it? And when will those people use it? And not trying to predict or sort of place how people will use it instead. So it's listening. I think, Alexander, you were spot on in that moment about really, really listening. And Kirsten, and I would scream around partnerships of how important they are. We know that the more people that can sort of influence design at the early stages or feedback into it as we're going along, it all enhances the product in itself. And, Tracy, I think you're right. We are doing so much, and we are so tied by funding because we are, the funding, is shrinking every year, every month, depending on sort of what happens. And if we're all trying to create something that's very similar, we'll just have all the very similar products. But if we could pull some of those resources and work together and think about how we could do things differently, we would have a far greater impact. Now, Samir, I think you're right in there about, if we are working in technology, everybody that I've met whom has created a product of some degree that is answering to a issue related to violence against women and girls, everybody will say that it's open source, that we're keen to work with other people, we're keen to share it, keen to see how we can expand its reach. And there is no hence sort of in the commercial sector where we want ownership and dominance. It's more about how do we lift this product into the hands of those people that need it most, bearing in mind, as we've mentioned so clearly, that advertising and promotion is hindered by many, many different challenges and barriers, and working together can really sort of look at that and enhance it. And the other piece is that, one of the things that I always encourage everybody to do is that the answers to some solutions are bubbling in far away places, and you wouldn't know about them until you reach out and start to ask questions about what's being developed. And I think that's really key. We do have brilliant tools now with AI where we've got people who are sort of testing different things out and how it can work. And I think the answer is to be open and to listen, and for us to come together as a collective and say technology can change the experience of those people who have endured any form of violence against women and girls. And actually, how can we use that positively, and how can we enhance their ability to access human support? I sort of always land in the last space. When I first started this work, sadly, like everyone else echoing 20 odd years ago, one of the key statistics that I sat with was that a person who'd experienced domestic abuse would tell 13 or more people of their experience before they received the first offer of support that could be useful. And when I always sort of dig into that, how many times and how long that journey of telling 13 people could be, I'm bearing in mind this is obviously statistics, so it's different for every individual person. But imagine if you could turn to the first person and you said, something's not right in my relationship, and that person was able to say, that sounds like you could have help if you spoke to somebody. Here's a telephone number. When you're ready, when you feel safe, please reach out. How that can be life-changing for both the victim and survivor and their children and the wider family. So thank you all very, very, very much for coming and joining us again. I appreciate your time, and your products are all incredible, and I hope that everybody listening and enjoying today's summit will spend some time and reach out, not only explore the product, but reach out to each peer person sort of representing them and form a partnership. Think about how you can promote it. Each one of these products are a solution. Thank you so much.